drink plenty of water today.
Hydrate.
I have coffee, which will dehydrate me, but
We
always
are.
keep me awake.
We
Okay,
might as well start
so we
then.
are live. Or are we? Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, we are. Good.
said
Okay.
that very excitedly.
Indeed. Right. Welcome, members and others, to the 89th meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 22 to 27 mandate. As always, it's recorded and broadcast online. Anybody in the public gallery, or indeed any members, usual rules apply. Phones silent or airplane mode, or indeed off. Agenda item 1 is apologies. We have no apologies thus far, but we do have a couple of members who have indicated, and indeed already are, joining us via Zoom. Agenda item 2 is a declaration of interests. All members are obliged to declare relevant interests at the start of a committee hearing. Does anybody have an interest they wish to declare at this point? No? Okay. Agenda item 3 is chairperson's business. 3.1, we have the 25-26 provisional outturn and 26-27 available funding. Excuse me. So members, at page 4 of your tabled pack, you will find the written statement that was received yesterday. Indeed, it's interesting that it was a written statement. In more normal times, it would perhaps be an oral statement, and perhaps would go alongside, or at least after the June monitoring round. But because of where we are with the budget, we don't have either of those things. So the what it says is in relation to non-ring-fenced resource DEL. First of all, we're dealing here with the outturn of the last financial year. In relation to non-ring-fenced resource DEL, the overall position is a small overspend of 0.5 million, £500,000. There's no overall loss of funding to the executive. That is within the budget exchange limit, as is a capital DEL underspend of £13 million. So that's within the budget exchange limits. I think it would be helpful for the department to give us, broken down either via text or table or both, slightly more detail on how the very large capital DEL underspend, which we were worried about and aware of, was reallocated. I just think it would be helpful for the public record that we get, that we have clarity on where that money moved to and from. We know obviously a big driver of the underspend was the A5 judgment, but it would be helpful to understand where it went. Again, the underspend, as I said, of £13 million is within the budget exchange scheme, so we don't lose any of that money. There is an underspend of just under 10 million, of £9.6 million in financial transactions capital. Of that, only 800,000, 0.8 million, can be carried forward. Similarly, ring-fence resource DEL cannot be used to fund other services, and the underspend is £229 million, but for clarity, 184 of this relates to student loan impairments as a result of the funding model used by the Treasury. From 26-27, the Treasury has reclassified ring-fenced resource DEL as AME, so this will look slightly differently. That's quite a big change. The budget exchange scheme only applies to DEL, therefore no ring-fenced resource funding is carried forward. The Minister also highlights the 26-27 available funding is the total amount available is 17,417 million resource DEL, 2,392.36 billion capital, and 92.6 million FTC. Now, these are net, I believe, of rates income. They don't include rates income.
We are going to seek clarity on that, Chair. Also, we want to seek clarity, if members are in agreement, on how much of that is coming from Westminster main estimates as well.
So Westminster main estimates have been laid in normal times. Obviously, in normal times, there would have been an agreed executive budget. There would have been a budget bill and an estimates document here. There would then have been a main estimates document from Westminster, which would have fed into the June monitoring round, where very early reduced requirements, such as they are in June, would have been added to by Westminster main estimates, and money would have been reallocated. Obviously, none of that is happening or can happen now. So we want to know quite how much has come through the Westminster estimates process, so that we so that we know of that for clarity. Okay, those totals that I just mentioned include funding earmarked to the Treasury for specific things. Resourcedale also includes the 17.2 million for energy costs, which was announced by the Treasury earlier this year, and but will not be provided until supplementary estimates stage later in the year. Finally, the Minister indicates that he continues to engage with the Treasury and the Secretary of State in respect of additional support, i.e. additional support, so that, I presume, the Executive can agree a budget. Now, members, first to say, next week the officials are going to give us a picture, a briefing on the final outturn, and indeed where the budget is more widely, so we'll be able to raise those questions. But I just wanted to say, first of all, that given this is the live topic now, where the budget is and where the absence of the budget is, and obviously there's some political instability in London, but we need to acknowledge that we are in a pretty grave situation because the Assembly is about to break up. This is our penultimate meeting as a committee. Even if a budget was agreed by 5 o'clock this afternoon, they couldn't pass a budget bill in time for recess. So we are in a very tricky situation. We do need to find out how much is in main estimates. We can't spend that money. We can't draw it down because there's no budget bill. Obviously, we're going to be very soon operating. We're already operating on a contingency basis in planning terms, but as of the 1st of August, that will become the legal position. I think it's extremely concerning, and I think it's also incumbent on us as the Finance Committee to get clarity again on where these discussions are. I'm not entirely clear what's actually happening. I'm slightly scared that we are taking it at face value that there are these intensive negotiations happening, but it doesn't sound very intensive to me. We hear about engagement from the Minister. We hear about ongoing discussions. Well, we're now 3 months into the financial year. We also are in a situation where we know that public services, in some cases, are operating at risk. Well, they're all operating irregularly at the minute because there's no signed-off budget, but they're operating. In some cases, I have heard reports about certain third sector or council services simply not going ahead because they feel there's too much risk and they don't feel they have budget cover in order to do it. I assume that situation is only going to escalate and get more serious and grave as we go on. This is an extremely serious position that we're in, and I'm slightly concerned that we are sleepwalking into it and we are not talking about the seriousness of this situation. So I wanted to put that on the record. I thought it would be bizarre if we, as the Finance Committee, we're not talking about it. We'll have the opportunity to ask questions of the Fiscal Council later in the Department next week, but I think we should once again ask the Department and say to them, you need to tell us, the Finance Committee, and tell the rest of the Assembly where, frankly, the hell we are in terms of the budget and what these phantom discussions are with the Treasury and when they're ever going to materialise into an agreed budget, because we can't simply go on as we are present because it's becoming absolutely farcical. Steve Aiken, want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of ones. I noticed on the capital sort of spent back, I had a reply from the Department of Infrastructure that said that it was 181.3 million they've handed back into the centre as capital underspend. And we've got further questions into sort of on other departments the degree of underspend, but it's quite clear there's a degree of underspend there. I fully understand the frustration there is. Members of political parties have been supposedly in discussion as well with the Secretary of State about a political discussion about budget and way forward in budget. Bearing in mind that the EU-UK talks have now been put off on sort of SPS agreements as well. I can't see why the interregnum's going on in London there's going to be any sort of talks between sort of the Secretary of State, the Treasury and the political parties as on the budget. Can't see that happening. And as to any information that's going on, I've picked up absolutely nothing. So I think it's there isn't a lot of information out there because there's not a lot going on. And the final one is, I noticed and speaking on behalf of the Speaker, I do notice his concerns and comments made about the fact of this written submission that came through when it could have been made an oral submission, particularly to the Assembly, and could have been in a position to talk to it. And it's not often, and I know the Speaker very well uses the words contempt, but he definitely feels very strongly that the Finance Minister was not dealing fairly with the Assembly. And I hope this isn't an indication of future bad behaviour coming from either the Department of Finance or where we're going to. But I just want to have those on record as well, please. Thanks, Chair.
Well, they didn't. If they were trying to hide from the Assembly, they didn't do terribly well in the sense that it went live. The embargo was lifted at 2:30, which was the precise moment I stand up and ask my topical question. But in any event, so for the purposes of the record, you referred, Dr. Aiken, to political discussions which the Secretary of State is convening or has said he might convene. I am aware that he was speaking to the executive last week. We, as other parties did, had meetings with him where he said he was convening those discussions. Perhaps we should ask the NIO what format that is taking, and we should ask them urgently, because as of right now, I have absolutely no idea what is happening, and I chair the Finance Committee in the Northern Ireland Assembly. If a constituent or a member of the media asked me what is happening with the budget, all I could say is, well, there are talks, but apparently we are told, but where are they happening? When are they happening? Who's undertaking them? To what end? And I think it's really, really, really grave and scary if we're just supposed to pretend all this is grand and normal. This is the first time, as far as I'm aware, in the post-1998 era, when there has been a sitting executive, but no budget this far into a financial year. It happened obviously when the executive was collapsed, but we have an executive now. I genuinely am a bit scared of what's happening. This seems to be complete chaos. Brian Kingston.
Well, we will all agree that it's not acceptable. The situation that we're in for all the departments, with their budget, and even I note even the Sinn Féin minister saying she can't live with the budget that has been set out. So all ministers are finding it unsustainable. I think we should be united across the Assembly in our demand to Treasury for a proper fiscal framework, a proper settlement, and it's important that we keep unity in that. I listened to what the Finance Minister said about the talks, so I wouldn't subscribe to your comment about phantom talks. Let us assume the talks are taking place, but obviously each member can express it as they wish. But yes, we need to hear of progress, and the situation at Westminster might be causing impairment to that. But it's important that we are united, and the figures received last week showing that whatever way you look at it, Northern Ireland is entitled to a larger per capita funding because of, we're detached from the mainland. We don't have the same economy of scale. We have greater rurality. So there are genuine reasons why public services will cost more in a smaller place. The fact that we're actually receiving less than Scotland per capita and only the same as Wales, and the whole issue of when their level of need was calculated. So I think that has strengthened our case, and we'll hear from the Fiscal Council today. I was at a meeting this morning with community groups in North Belfast, with neighbourhood renewal funding. So their contracts are running out in less than a week currently. So this has been felt, especially in groups that rely on statutory funding and groups that do important work within the volunteer and community sector. I've written to the Communities Minister with an urgent question asking about the clarification of their funding. So it's affecting all sorts of services. But we must be united in supporting the case for Northern Ireland receiving a better settlement from Treasury.
Well, I bring in Gemma Dole now. Yeah, Gemma Dole.
Yeah, I actually think Brian has hit the nail on the head there. I don't believe that any minister is sitting back and letting this happen. I don't think any minister wants this to happen. And I do think we need to be united. And just in terms of the statement yesterday, on our email from Peter, it says the statement is embargoed until 2:30. However, it can be raised during the topical part of finance questions today. So
that's at the 2:30. 2:30 is when the topical starts. So it was always clear it was going to be raised then.
Yeah. So you could have raised it.
I did. Yes. Well,
that's not really an argument then, because you did raise it.
But the Finance Minister didn't read it out to the Assembly. It wasn't an oral statement.
No, I'm aware of that. But I think Brian is right. We do need to be united, and it's the chaos at Westminster that, obviously it hasn't helped things here. So it just highlights again the need that we need to be in charge of our own fiscal powers here. So,
well, certainly I would agree with the latter part. I think it's important to say our job as the Finance Committee is to scrutinise the budget setting, not simply to say we'll do what we'll all agree and we'll not ask any questions. I think most people, and we will be talking to the Fiscal Council today, are cognizant of the Fiscal Council analysis, and they do agree with the mathematics done by the department, which indicates that Northern Ireland is funded to closer to its level of need than Scotland and Wales, who are funded at a higher level. That is borne out by their research. But that is clearly an argument for pressing for more funding, but that's not the same thing as saying that it is legitimate or sustainable for Northern Ireland to operate without a budget, and it is a profound abdication of responsibility for ministers, including the Finance Minister, to simply pretend that we can go on and it's what you talked about, Brian, about those community organisations who are awaiting funding. It becomes, at this point, using them as negotiating chips in a negotiation which isn't really even definitely happening so far as I could see. And if it is happening, we as the Finance Committee need to know when it's happening, how it's happening, and what the outcomes are, because at the minute it's chaos. And yes, there's chaos in London, but that doesn't legitimise, in my view, chaos in Belfast, making it even worse. Okay, on that note, I think we'll move on, members. The next agenda item is the notification.
Sorry, Chair.
Go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
Just on that, I mean, I will seek clarification. I don't understand the point about student loan impairments, which
It's a traditional thing.
Yeah.
So basically, it's an accounting thing. So not to dismiss it, it's an important question to address. Correct if I is wrong, because of the way student loans, because they basically, it was the way they have higher, well, there are more students and more student loans in the UK.
They're calculated at the English fee levels so that it would allow the executive to put up student fees here to those levels. So it's notional. So we get allocated that amount of money. The executive doesn't use it because our fee levels are much, much less. So the student loans don't meet that level. So it just falls back into the system. It
Can't be spent on anything else.
It doesn't exist, and it's fully ring fenced.
It can't be spent on anything else, and it doesn't, and it's never. It can't be used on anything else, and this always happens.
okay.
It's a notional amount of money, effectively.
Okay.
But it always looks big.
Okay, it doesn't mean we've less students, or well,
No,
It means we've lower fees.
Lower
Yes,
fees.
I know,
So
lower
the student
fees, yeah.
level, the student fee level is set according to what English fees are. So
Okay.
that means we always have an amount that goes back every year because our student fees are significantly less.
Because they have several £1,000s more
Yeah.
for student fees.
And it's not
in
money that
England
we
and
can
Wales.
use for anything
Sorry,
else.
no, it can't be used for anything else.
okay.
It's entirely tied to that system of loans.
Okay, so 3.3 is a note from the Minister saying he intends to make an oral statement on the 29th of June. Now, the next, we'll obviously circulate that when we get it. 3.4 is the launch of the Baby Loss Certificate Scheme. And I would say at a time when there's obviously lots of politics going on, including concerns over the absence of a budget and lots of other things, I think it was really welcome to have the event on Monday night. I would commend the Minister and the Department and the Registrar for holding the event. I would also say it was really welcome that we had representatives there from organisations like SANS and Miscarriage UK who participated, who campaigned for this and who obviously support women and families who experienced pregnancy loss. It was really moving, and I think it was nice for it to be done on a cross-party basis with multiple ministers, including the previous Finance Minister, who obviously had a role in it, and indeed the Health Minister. So I'm very pleased to have been there, and I'm sure other members of the committee were, and very actually proud of the role this committee played in encouraging and calling for this to be included in the bill, and pleased to say the Minister and the Department, particularly the Registrar team, worked to make that happen. I think it's something we can be proud of. And just to reiterate for anybody who's watching, our large audience, and for anybody who does want to avail of one of the certificates, the scheme is now live. If you visit NI Direct, you'll be able to access it, and I think that's an example of something that is in one sense small, but in another sense large, very important for the people for whom it's important and meaningful. So just want to reflect on that. I'm very pleased that we were able to play that role. Harry, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just to say, Chair, I do know people that applied on the day, probably some of them one of the first ones to do so, and they were very pleased with the process and how it all worked, and yep, delighted the scheme's up and running. A lot of people were waiting on it happening, so it is very positive. Yep, thank you.
Yeah,
Just
well,
echo
and-
your
and-
remarks, Chair.
And I think it had 1,800
1,800 in the first
applications on the first day, so
Wow.
a sign that there was demand there for something, and hopefully it is meaningful for those people. Agenda item 4 is draft minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of June. They're page 7 of the meeting pack. Members, excuse me, If everybody is content that they are a true reflection of the meeting held on the 17th of June, I will sign the minutes. Grand. Okay. Now, agenda item 5 is matters arising. 5.1 is tranche 2 allocations from the Transformation Fund, and that's at page 20 of the meeting pack, where there's correspondence from the Department of Finance regarding the Pathways to Work proposal, which was included in the projects supported in the second tranche of the Transformation Fund. It is indicated that DFC will provide a further £270,000 to support early phases of the project, and that this is not directly comparable with local growth funding or previous iterations of funding streams. The Department also indicated that it is not designed as a successor or intended to address any funding gaps. The project represents a shift from previous employability approaches and aims to redesign a new work and health model with a much stronger emphasis on integration between local health and employability services to remove health and disability related barriers to finding and sustaining employment, albeit it should be said in parenthesis that the amount is very similar to the amount lost by via the Local Growth Fund, and indeed many of the same organisations are partner organisations. So this is just to note. 5.2, Committee for the Executive Office Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. That's at page 23 of the meeting pack, where there is correspondence from the Executive Office Committee to the Finance Minister requesting information on any bids submitted by departments since the launch of the EVOG strategic framework. So that, members, is to note. Agenda item 5.3 is from the Committee for Communities, and it relates to child rights impact assessments and equality impact assessments. There's correspondence from the Communities Committee to the Head of Civil Service and Permanent Secretaries regarding consistency in relation to the completion of these impact assessments. This is just for us to note. 5.4 is from the Committee for Executive Office, and it's just copy correspondence because we're copied into it from its correspondence to the Finance Minister about access to records for victims and survivors. 5.5 is correspondence from an individual. It relates to governance of the Independent Remuneration Board and Assembly Commission. This is a person who has corresponded with us in this matter before. We have highlighted to him that this genuinely, sincerely is not a matter for this committee, but if members are content, the clerk will reiterate this and also suggest that he correspond with the Assembly Audit Committee, who may decide they want to follow up on some of his queries. We really are not trying to be unhelpful to this man, but or this person, but it's not really for us. So if members are content, we'll send it on. We will make that clear once again and redirect to the Audit Committee. 5.6 is a series of DALO readout responses. No, it's one DALO readout response, and this one relates to the 17th of June, i.e. last week, and the Legal Oversight's Complaint Commissioner. There are papers. Papers begin at page 17 of the table pack. The Department indicates that a briefing with the new Commissioner will be scheduled probably in mid to late November, but they will keep, as in they will be a briefing for us.
They will come and brief, yes.
Okay, they will keep us abreast of any pertinent developments. The Department of Finance, Northern Ireland Utility Regulator. Now this relates to some of what we were talking about earlier on. Further to the committee's query in respect of cash profiles and use in the voting account, the Department has provided additional detail on the Northern Ireland utility regulators' use of the authority of the vote on account. It highlights that more up-to-date forecasts indicate that the Northern Ireland the utility regulator is more likely to exhaust its voting account by the start of August rather than June, and will need additional funding in the form of an advance from the Consolidated Fund in early August. This will be reflected in the next report to the committee, which the Department has provided on a monthly basis. We already received the same, the first report, which was considered at last week's meeting. I think it would also be helpful if we could just be kept abreast of where people are coming for the Department to tell us where there are specific requests under the voting account, particularly in the absence of a budget. I presume what will happen is that, in a sense, the contingency letter and the default of 1st of August just kind of cancels the voting account, and people, they almost don't need to, but okay. Right, okay, then we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is SR 2026-1 108, the whole government accounts designation of bodies order, Northern Ireland 2026. We discussed this a few weeks ago, yes. The department has formally laid a statutory rule, SR 26 108, the whole government accounts designation of bodies order, Northern Ireland 2026, which will designate bodies for the financial year ended 31st of March 2026, enabling the Department of Finance to require public bodies to provide it with financial information. Members will appreciate this as an annual exercise and is subject to negative resolution. It is due to come into operation on the 30th of June. At the meeting on the 27th of May, we indicated we were content with the examiner statutory rules. As reported on the rule, there are documents that are relevant, including a clerk's cover memo and supporting documentation in the meeting pack, but the ESR said that there's nothing for us particular. She has nothing to draw attention to. So, assuming members have no particular questions about this SR, I'm going to ask them if they are content with Statutory Rule 2026-108, the whole government accounts designation of bodies order. And I'll put the question that the Committee for Finance has considered SR 2026-108, the whole government accounts designation of bodies order, NI 2026, and has no objection to the rule. Agreed? Agreed.
Content.
Agenda item 7, Legal Complaints and Regulation 2016 Act, Commencement Number 2 Order, Northern Ireland 2026. So I'm going to refer members to page 62 of the meeting pack, where there's correspondence from the Department of Finance to the Assembly Business Office. This order is for noting only and brings into operation Section 9 of the Legal Complaints and Regulation Act. So this, and we've discussed this I think in the past, is the abolition of the Office of Lay Observer, and the functions will be taken over by the Legal Services Oversight Commissioner, who we look forward to hearing from later this year. But amid everything else we have to do, I will once again ask the question why we're spending our time looking at this very important subject, whenever one might think the Justice Department and Justice Committee are more appropriate vehicles for this scrutiny and oversight. Agenda item 8 is the legislative consent memorandum on the Cyber Security and Resilience Network Information Systems Bill. Members, Hansard are going to report on this. If members are content but they're not present, they're going to listen back. So at page 20 of the table pack, there's a Hansard transcript of last week's session. This is going to be added to the appendices of the draft report we are just about to consider. Following last week's oral briefing with officials, a draft report in the LCM has been prepared, beginning at page 67 of the meeting pack. Members, the legislative consent memorandum in respect of the Cybersecurity and Resilience Network and Information Systems Bill was formally laid in the Business Office on the 9th of June 2026. The Department is proposing to extend the provisions of the bill to Northern Ireland by way of LCM, and we had a briefing from the department officials last week. Paul Grocott, was that who it was? Yes.
Paul Grocott, yes.
And his officials. Members, I'm reading out the bit that's an instruction to me. Members, if we are content, I'm going to seek, I assume members are content, given there were no dissenting voices last week, to support the Minister of Finance in seeking the Assembly's endorsement of the legislative consent motion, which reads that this Assembly endorses the principle of the extension to Northern Ireland of the provisions of the Cybersecurity and Resilience Network and Information Systems Bill. Are we content?
Content.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any typographical or formatting errors in this report, which we're about to go through, will be amended at final proofing stage before it's circulated to MLAs and published on the committee webpage. Do members have any amendments to the draft report? No.
Thank you.
So if there are no amendments, I'm going to proceed through the report seeking formal agreement of the report as drafted. First to the title page, membership powers, table of content and list of abbreviations. So I'm going to refer you to that part of the report, and I'm going to put the question: are members content that the title page, committee membership and powers stand part of the report? Content?
Content.
Okay. Now the background section. Are members content that the background section at paragraphs 1 to 7 stand part of the report? Content?
Content.
Now the purpose of legislative consent motion section, that's at paragraph 8. Are members content that the purpose of legislative consent motion section at paragraph 8 stand part of the report? Content?
Content.
Now the next section is the committee consideration of the legislative consent motion section, and I'm going to put the question that members are content that the committee consideration of the legislative consent motion section, paragraphs 9 to 25 stand part of the report. Content?
Content.
Okay. Now is the conclusion, that is at paragraph 26, and I'm going to put the question that members are content that the conclusion, paragraph 26, stand part of the report. Content? Content.
Content.
Okay. Now, members, the appendices section starts at page 85. These will be updated in due course, including with the Hansard transcript from today's deliberations and minutes of proceedings. So I'll put the question: are members content that the appendices stand part of the report? Content?
Content.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to put the final question now, that the report on the legislative consent memorandum in respect to the Cybersecurity and Resilience Network and Information Systems Bill be the 12th report of the Committee for Finance. Content? Okay,
Content.
members, if we're all content, then this will be laid in the Business Office, published on the Committee's website with a link issued to all MLAs in advance of the debate on the LCN. That debate will not be until the new session, i.e. after the summer. Okay, everyone content?
Thank you.
Now, agenda item 9 is... Sorry. We'll do correspondence then first, okay? We are running unusually ahead of time.
It's unusual for us.
So we'll go and we'll crack through the correspondence while we are here.
Page 18.
Okay. So, agenda item 12 is correspondence. 12.1 is from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and it relates to disability and poverty in Northern Ireland. That's on page 488 of the meeting pack. An important report from the foundation. I would commend it to members. It's for noting, unless anybody wishes to specifically comment on it. It's page 488. Agenda 12.2 is a pivotal report on improving the institution's suggested reforms to the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive. That's page 580 of the meeting pack. It was published by Pivotal on the 15th of June 2026. As to note, I presume it's already been shared with the Assembly and Executive Review or Reform Committee. Excuse me. 12.3 is the Hansard transcript of the departmental oral briefing that we had last week on the level of need. That is at page 62, and it's just note that obviously members may wish to draw upon it for the purposes of today's briefing session with the Fiscal Council. But yeah, do the forward work program. We're thrilling ourselves with our agenda, moving through the agenda. Agenda item 13.
Wacky world of finance.
Absolutely. So members of draft forward work programs at page 604. We have a few things. Obviously, we only have one more. After today, we only have one more session, which is next week, and we will be hearing from the departmental officials on budget-related matters, which is obviously the most important topic at the minute. But there are a couple of other things which the clerk will update us on before we...
Yeah, Chair, members have talked before about the shared property update briefing, and once there is the new team in place, we will put that into the forward work programme that's going to be later on in the session. We're still waiting an invite for the 16th of September, but we're provisionally booking our journey to Dublin to meet with our counterpart committee there informally, which means that the committee's first meeting will be the 9th of September. So we'll go out again with emails and warnings and reminders and so on about that. The LCM on the Public Office Accountability Bill, which members will recall was largely known as the Hillsborough Bill. We're not expecting that until after the summer recess, so we'll expect paperwork coming from the department then letting us know about the motion and so on. The other thing to note is the members will recall that the head of civil service proactively offered to brief on the transformation fund, so we've managed to get a date pinned down for the 30th of September for that one, so she can give us an update on the spend so far on tranche 1 and where everything sits now with tranche 2.
Okay. Great. So if members are agreed, we will publish the forward work programme on the committee web page. Okay. Great. Thank you, Helen.
And
Now, we are going to go, I think we have... Yeah, we can maybe take a...
no, we don't.
Well, we might go into a short
Chair,
close
what
session.
we might
Yeah,
just do is
Go into a short close session. We'll suspend briefly, yeah.
Briefly, yeah.
Suspend briefly.
Just-
Members can have a comfort break.
Yes.
Go and rehydrate. This is like the World Cup. You can have a hydration break.
This is our rehydration break. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Chair.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
That's us.
Right, okay, we're back in. Right. Thank you, members. This is now our oral briefing from Nick Ictu on the civil service inquiry. We're very pleased to have Nick Ictu's Assistant General Secretary, Jerry Murphy, who's joined us today. At page 106 of your meeting pack is a clerk's memo. And there's also a report which was referenced last week by the FDA, a report they've co-authored with the Fabian Society. They called Adapt, Innovate and Transform, or they call Adapt, Innovate and Transform. So if members are content, we will add that to the evidence base for the report. Right. And we'll welcome Jerry Murphy, as I said, who's from Nick Ictu. Jerry, please make an opening statement, and as always, members, indicate if you wish to ask a question of Jerry.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your invitation to appear today. As the Chair has pointed out, the Assistant General Secretary of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, which is the umbrella organisation for the trade union movement across the entire island. My role, however, is mainly to represent the movement in Northern Ireland, and it's in that capacity that I appear today. So both NIPSA and the FDA, two trade unions affiliated to ICTU, have already appeared before you and offered their views on your work looking into the culture and performance of the Northern Ireland Civil Service. And I hope my contribution will further assist you in this work. Can I begin by saying in general terms, I agree, unsurprisingly, with my NIPSA and FDA colleagues and the contributions they've already made to the committee. And I beg your indulgence, but there may be a certain amount of repetition in what I'm about to say. The NICS has endured over the last 2 decades in an at times tumultuous and challenging environment. We had in 2002 the introduction of the Review of Public Administration. We then had the outworkings of a prolonged period of privatisation, a voluntary exit scheme in 15-16, the first of an assembly collapse followed that, and then we had a series of less than successful restarts. Yeah. We had the reorganisation of the government departments, the emergence of NICS HR Connect, RHI, another assembly collapse, COVID, and a third, the hat trick of assembly collapses in the period. And towards the end of that litany of challenges, the working environment for our civil servants was complicated further by an unprecedented cost of living crisis, much of which we continue to endure, and of course over the entire period we were plagued by budgetary cuts and fiscal uncertainty. With all of this and the decline in salary values of approaching 20% for the same civil servants, staff morale took a huge hit, as my colleague Cornel Gates pointed out to you, and is now only beginning to improve. The Northern Ireland Civil Service is vital to the effective functioning of government, our public services and the economy as it provides the means to enable policy development and indeed the pathways to the realisation of those policies. But as I've outlined, the NICS has the capacity to do so. Its capacity to do so has been severely impacted upon by the politics of this place and the fiscal policies developed in large part elsewhere. And while the civil service has grown across the entire UK by 31% since 2016, the NICS has expanded by a whole 2% over the same period. So we have a civil service that is understaffed. Indeed, the Audit Officer report of March 31st, 2025 indicated there were 5,500 vacant posts. Indeed, I heard Ian Snowden, the Permanent Secretary for the Department for the Economy, yesterday outline that in his department alone he has 300 current vacancies and only the budget to fill 100, I think 109 he said. So 5,500 vacant posts. This is even more striking when you consider that here we expect so much more from these same civil servants than their English, Scottish and Welsh counterparts, in addition to having functions such as social care, normally carried out by councils in England, Scotland and Wales. Northern Ireland civil servants have to deal with further administrative fallout around, for example, post-Brexit arrangements. Then, of course, they have been subject to investigation and interrogation by the Audit Office, a report from the Public Accounts Committee, the pivotal think tank, amongst others, and a media which at times seems to have forgotten that civil servants act on the instructions of ministers rather than determining what has to be done themselves. Indeed, it's impressive that we're not in a worse situation than we currently find ourselves in. Nevertheless, steps are being taken to bring about the necessary reforms and changes needed to address elements of the culture and structure of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, and we can manage here with a view to improving performance and accelerating progress across our public services, economy and society. I'm nearly there, Chair. The issues arising as a consequence of the disastrous voluntary exit scheme and the emergence of HR Connect have been highlighted to you by both my colleagues in NIPSA and the FDA. A movement to address these are in the final stages with the development of integrated strategic workforce planning and the Job Families Network. These approaches will importantly see the re-establishment of an in-house, largely centralised HR management system The staffing issues, inclusive of outstanding vacancies, the high numbers of agency staff employed on a temporary basis, and the numbers of civil servants in temporary promoted posts, can now be addressed with greater efficiency. It's simply not acceptable that appointments in too many cases under HR Connect are taking close to a year to complete, or that almost 20% of the workforce remain on temporary contracts. Some of these workers have been employed for years on these contracts, which despite their longevity remain insecure. While these civil servants in temporary promoted posts who have demonstrated their worth in the roles they find themselves in remain in a limbo before becoming affirmed in these positions. As things stand, it's a lack of workforce planning that is evident. Identifying and appointing appropriate candidates for initial appointments and promotions, be they candidates originating from outside of the civil service or those travelling along established internal promotional routes, should be easier with Integrate. In the context of greater control informed by strategic workforce planning and the jobs family framework, staffing levels will stabilise and begin to grow to meet the demand in a focused manner, leading to, we hope, improved performance across the service. The salary issue also needs to be addressed. If we are to develop the civil service into the organisation we as service users deserve, then those civil servants need salaries that reflect the skills and capabilities they bring to the table. Graduates recruited to meet capability and skills shortages, and staff developed internally to do the same deserve salaries that match those of their colleagues in the private sector. The development and evolution of policies in conjunction with the trade unions concerning sickness and absence and conduct and discipline is well underway, and these negotiations are reflective of a wider growth of a more collegiate culture across the civil service and can be viewed very positively. Trade union concerns regarding sometimes dissimilar interpretations of processes and procedures are now in place where greater levels of consistency in approach are being developed. Internal movement amongst and between sections and departments should also be easier with a centralised in-house HR system, allowing for faster development of policy and enactment. Those of us who work with the civil service appreciate the work they do, even if at times we're frustrated by policy direction and at times a grindingly slow pace of policy emergence. Indeed, I have direct experience of virtually all of these issues I have highlighted to you over 30 years of work. Yet I believe we are seeing a positive change being brought about. It will take more time and require additional resourcing, but it has momentum and the trade union movement will do what it can to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. That was really helpful. And don't worry, I'm relatively concise compared to some of our witnesses. I don't want to name them, but that was useful. So members, as always, indicate should you wish to ask a question. A couple of points I particularly wanted to pick up there, Jerry. One, you mentioned, so there's clearly a pattern of difficulty around managing vacancies. There is a debate about understaffing and the right sizing of the civil service here, but and no one would dispute that the vacancy level, the number of temporary promotions, and the length of time it takes to get people appointed is a problem. I don't know if you're able, and you might not have the data to hand. I know your own background is in education, in the education union world. Could you give us a flavour, if you're able now, and if it's written evidence afterwards, that's grand, as to how that compares with other bits of the public sector? The private sector might be different, but a year to get somebody into post, I mean, given that person might only be in the post for 2 or 3 years, seems very, very problematic. Is that markedly slower than other bits of the public sector from your experience?
I think that if you look particularly at the period, the number of years up to COVID, from 15-16 up to the COVID pandemic, at that stage, I was in a different job. I was leading the INTO, the teachers' union, and what I saw there was, the voluntary exit scheme allowed a significant outflow of experience and talent. People who had put in some long time in particular departments went out. We found it particularly difficult in that period, to deal with the fallout. And the fallout was that, people were promoted through who didn't have those necessary levels of experience that we were used to dealing with. The appointments process under Connect, and I'm not an expert here, but I did listen, and I talk frequently I listened to Carmel Gates's evidence, and I spoke to Robert Murtaugh of the FDA, and I have talked to other trade unions, because there are other trade unions involved here. Unison and Unite in particular have very large memberships, and the appointments process is particularly frustrating. It would appear to everybody, because the length of time. Mr. Kingston pointed out in the last committee meeting that I watched that it was 8 months. You quoted an appointment process of 8 months. We're aware of, people 8 months and slightly more. So it's quite clear that Connect not functioning the way it should function.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and then you mentioned the VR, and that's a thing that has come up perennially. What can you give us? You mentioned that. I mean, you experienced that at INTO, did you? Where you had people who you were engaging with, who took voluntary redundancy, and that weakened the organisation. Presumably, did it slow down delivery of negotiations, for example, or slow down you doing business with them in the world you were in at that time?
Yes, we definitely experienced that. Now, it did coincide with a particularly difficult period of financial uncertainty, shall we say, and the collapse, the various collapses of the institutions in that period. But the negotiations in education at that stage passed from the hands of a very experienced team of people to people who had been operating at a number of grades below the grades that we had been negotiating with. There was also the issue of culture. The culture seemed to change as well, because it appeared that there was a growing reluctance to be as direct as possibly we had been used to, and that's a mixture, I suppose, of inexperience and possibly the political backdrop in which those civil servants were operating. But the short answer to your question is we saw that very clearly.
Now, we've talked about the HR and the staff performance part of it. Another part of this is about the two are interlinked, obviously, the performance of the civil service and how it links with, how effectively it does its job, and there's clearly a link in terms of how well it's managed and how well people are incentivised and paid and all of that. Do you think that the civil service is too siloed? And that's an observation made by very widely from people from different perspectives, that just structurally there's one empire here, there's another empire here, and that constitutionally, because of the way that the system's set up, it actually disincentivises civil servants from working across, working across organisation. I mean, one example, ICTU is an example of an organisation where you're working across unions, people, completely different professional backgrounds and geographies to achieve common ends. But it appears that in the civil service, they kind of struggle with that because you've got this empire. There's one empire or one silo which is working to X minister and X policy priorities, and then another one working to a different set of policy priorities. Is that something you've observed?
Yes, and not only I, but indeed it's a large part of the pivotal analysis of the situation too. Yes, the siloing is an issue. Again, speaking from personal experience, if I look at education, you know, there are elements of the delivery of an education service which transcend education. So there are health considerations, there are youth justice considerations. All of these things, you know, require cooperation, and the siloing is very evident when you're trying to navigate that maze. I think the civil servants aren't, by and large, to blame. By the way, I think the nature of the political settlement itself and the way in which it has evolved, if you like, lend itself to making the delivery of services more difficult. We're also asking we're asking them, if you like, to find pathways and bridges between these silos. So I think it's a problem. It's very obviously a problem, but I don't think it's a problem of the civil services making. It's one which they have to navigate, and doing it against all of the issues which I outlined at the beginning of my submission is proving to be extremely challenging.
Fair enough. Okay. And Forsyth.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much, Jerry, for being here. In terms of the civil service, obviously, you know, it's so big, it's so broad, diverse, different types of work that are getting done. We've also got the different levels within it as well. I just wanted to ask in terms of, you know, just the wide nature of it. You obviously speak for, you know, a big block of it, but there obviously are then really specific different units, different cultures, and I just wonder. So we're obviously looking at this inquiry in terms of just that whole performance and culture. It's been something that I've seen coming through in terms of there are specific issues within certain departments, within certain types of work, within certain grades of the organisation. Do you think that comes through the appropriate forums well enough, or is there anything that we could be recommending to improve that? Because I know, you know, a lot of what you're saying is, you know, quite high level and across the broad nature of the service, and I think whenever it is so big, for me, I sometimes think those really specific things get lost in that, and there are really specific issues, and as you said, HR Connect maybe isn't just getting into the detail of them, and I'm just keen to just tease that out a bit in terms of what people are coming to you as a union representative of to try to make some good recommendations here.
Well, I don't want to mislead you, but people are no longer coming to me directly, but I do hear from the other trade unions involved some of the issues. So to begin with, there has been, up until fairly recently, it would appear again, to have been that inconsistency to which you are referring, simply because the HR knowledge base and HR experience that previously existed prior to the emergence of Connect had been stripped out because, you know, as Conor pointed out, she formally negotiated with the heads of all of the different departments. That ceased to be, and it became centralised. And, for example, the management of complaints around conduct and behaviour was further outsourced, if you like, to Capita. So that internal experience and management of issues became absent. We are extremely hopeful, and our trade union colleagues are working very hard with the senior civil service and those negotiating on their behalf around this people first approach, the integrate, you know, the strategic workforce planning and all of that. And indeed, my colleague Denise Curley, you know, detailed, you know, some of the work that they were doing. So the problems, I don't think they're going to disappear entirely. They won't. This is a workforce. It's the third largest chunk of our wider public sector. So we're always going to have issues presenting themselves. I think for us, as a trade union movement, we want to see those dealt with efficiently and quickly and fairly. And we believe that what's beginning to emerge, or what's emerging from Integrate and that People First approach, is going to take us in that direction. Well, there's already evidence, we believe, that it is taking us in that direction. What it's also doing, which I think is important as well, is it's promoting a return to a more collaborative culture, not only across the civil service, but with the trade union movement. I think that was reflected in the evidence which my colleagues gave.
No, definitely, and I think it came through very much in Carmel's evidence. That, I wasn't aware of the way that those type of HR issues got lifted out, given to outsource people to manage those issues, and all the while you could have a number of issues with the staff member, and prolonged potentially work-related stress issues linked across potentially to bullying in the workplace. And it's really, really concerning to think that you would have complete strangers pick up something of a really sensitive HR nature, whereas it's my opinion that it's your line management and those that you're working with that understand the environment that you're working in. So it's really good to see it moving back into that more collaborative and more human way of managing things. I think just from what you're saying as well, it would be our experience. We got a lot of information, a lot of things coming through over a period of time that sort of took us to this place of having this inquiry, where you're looking at those types of temporary promotions, the agency staff, bullying complaints, different types of sick leave, and the data not really being analysed or talking to each other. So I think that's the big move with Integrate, having all of the data intertwined. But for me, I would be a bit concerned that we're moving in a direction to say Integrate's going to have all the answers. We just want to make sure that we're making clear and concise recommendations that reflects what the workforce are saying, what's making those things happen. If there's anything that we can do to try to help that along, I just would really, really keen to grasp that, because I can see the intentions there. I can see everybody's talking. We were out at Integrate as well, but it's going to take some time to actually get there. And it's just, if there were any sort of short, sharp, quick recommendations that we could make, I would just appreciate any input that you have, given that you're speaking to the people, and what would be the most overriding one to try to get moving quickly rather than relying on the system.
Well, I think the most important thing's already underway here. You can't transform the word of the moment. You can't transform an organisation of this size if everybody's not bought in, and it would appear that that everybody has bought in now, and I think that is the most important thing. So, if that could continue to be encouraged and promoted as something positive, not only does it assist with this matter, but we have this transformation process to look forward to in health and education and other places. And if on the back of 2 decades of turmoil, in effect, we're seeing the emergence of a new way forward here in terms of collaborative working, then I think that's the thing that should be seized upon. The resourcing is always going to be an issue. Political circumstances will change, but if the collaborative approach can be maintained, I think that's the vital thing.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And again, like you say, the word transformation, I think everybody is bought into it, but we just need people not to be concerned about what the language means. We just want to see things working better, people communicating better, things being delivered, more efficiently. It doesn't mean cutting back on staff or anything like that. People are quick to move to that chain of thought, but transformation just means doing things better, and hopefully that working together will be a good, strong recommendation coming through. Thank you, Jerry. Thanks.
Okay, Gemma Dolan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jerry, for coming in today. It's good to see you again. And the last time I saw you was at the Good Jobs Bill protest down at the steps. So I'm just wondering, Given the challenges that have been highlighted around the performance and the culture and the morale within the civil service, how do you think the Good Jobs Bill could improve that and help drive the improvements around the performance and culture in the civil service?
Well, I think that fundamental to the Good Jobs Bill is the issue of trade union voice. And the civil service, I think, points to, an example of where that voice has actually been listened to, by and large, not entirely, but it's a good example of what can happen when trade unions are encouraged to share their views and work with the management, if you like, in inverted commas, to get things done. My colleagues, both Carmel and Denise, and indeed Robert, were very quick to point to that. Maybe not directly, but indirectly, what they were saying was that the collaboration between themselves and the management of the Northern Ireland Civil Service was bringing about changes which were impacting positively on their members and leading to improved performance across the piece, which fundamentally I think is what we are all seeking to bring about, improve the conditions of the people that I represent, that give them a greater say in how the workplace is being managed, allowing space for them to make contributions to how the work that is before them is carried through most effectively. So, the Good Jobs Bill opens up that potential for a lot more workplaces, and something I think that, wants to be encouraged.
Thank you. Just from your perspective, how would you assess the impact, or what impact the current culture of the civil service is having on staff morale at the minute?
Well, currently, a lot of the issues that I addressed or listed at the very beginning remain in play. The issue of financial uncertainty and understaffing are still very much in play. We're asking a hell of a lot of these public servants. We are seeking to provide 5-star government with 3-star resourcing. So it's natural that they are under huge pressure. It's real pressure. I see it myself. You mentioned the Good Jobs Bill. I've worked very closely over the last 2 years with the Department for the Economy officials. I see that pressure. I understand the pressure that they're under. But my experience has been that these civil servants want to deliver for people. They want to get the work done. They want to ensure that things are improved. And I think this committee and we in the trade union movement, and indeed everybody in this place, need to put our weight behind that, and do what we can. And we in the trade union movement will try and do that.
Yeah, they want to improve it, but there's only so much they can do when they're limited in resources.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Chair. That's
Okay,
me.
Jerry, Carol.
Thanks from one Jerry to another. Thanks, Jerry. Just in terms of the general discussion about the civil service, it's quite sort of accepted logic, and you touched upon it already, that the civil service and the public sector generally is too big. I think that's incorrect, and I think your percentages you touched upon compared with the UK, could you maybe expand upon it? Did I hear you're right, Jerry? You said it's expanded by 2% in the north and 30% in the UK. And then more generally, what would you say when people say that the civil service is too big and we need to reduce it?
Well, the figures I'm quoting are from the Northern Ireland Audit Office report. And just if I might throw a couple more at you, Jerry. So the audit office is reporting that, over the 10-year period from 2016 up, our civil service increased by 2%. In the same period, the Scottish civil service increased by 70%. The Welsh civil service increased by 8%, and overall in the UK it was 31%. Now, bearing in mind that we are asking so much more of a smaller number of civil servants than in those other places. So, I give the example of social care. We're administering social care here, but councils are administering social care in the UK. So that's, a whole area of additional work. There's another area of additional work, and the other example I gave was, the administrative mechanisms which have fallen out of the Brexit settlement. What was the second part of your question, Jerry? The first part was about the numbers. Oh, you asked me, did I think it was too big?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, clearly it's not too big. Clearly it's too small. We have 5,500 unfilled vacancies currently, and even if we fill them, we probably have work for the same number of people again. If we were to really be funding and resourcing the civil service to the level that it requires to be funded. On top of that, there are also 3,000, almost 4,000, I think it's 12% of the workforce in temporary posts. Again, I'm talking to the audit office figures here, or the audit committee report. So those are people who are effectively doing either 1.5 or 2 jobs. I think that anybody who suggests that it's too big and too sprawling is frankly wrong. The civil service needs to expand.
No, useful. Thanks. And I think we had some comments last week from FDA about AI, and obviously there's possible benefits to AI, but also there's huge questions about it. Has ICTU any developed work on AI in the civil service, or still early stages?
No, it's still very much in the early stages. We would have significant concerns about AI, concern, of course, about potential threat to jobs, but also concerns about data and data management and data handling. We're very much in the early stages of looking at all of that. We're looking at it in terms of the entire public service, not simply the civil service, and indeed work in general. Indeed, we were doing some work, because this is not an issue which is simply limited to the north here. This is an issue for the trade union movement right across the island, and indeed probably across the whole world. So it's something we're only beginning to get to grips with. Our colleagues in the Financial Services Union have done quite a substantial amount of work, and I would point you to, in particular, some work produced by them in respect to this. We will continue to do what we can to prepare ourselves, and indeed the workforce and our wider trade union colleagues, for the advance of AI. But it's going to prove to be a huge challenge, I believe.
Yeah, and just two other quick questions, if that's okay. You obviously touched upon the length of time it takes to interview and fill posts within the civil service, and we've raised that a few times in the committee, and I've had correspondence about that too. I've had a few people contacting me who are going for posts, and they've got disabilities, and they've kind of made that clear for the interviews, but there's been concern that they haven't either got the appropriate support either during the interview or the appropriate response and support after the interview. So these are people with disabilities. Has that came across the kind of your desk or activities?
Well, it hasn't come across my desk, but we in ICTU have a disabilities committee who are very determined to see the back of, you know, issues that you're highlighting there. So if you would care to share that material with us,
Okay.
we take it forward on those members' behalf.
Yeah, well, that'd be useful. Thanks, Jerry. And final one for me is that, and not to get you in trouble with your with Robert Murda and colleagues, but I mean, some people would say that civil service can be sort of top heavy, sort of too much management. Would you say that's the case, or would you say the kind of broadly got that balance correct?
Well, I think the civil service is evolving, if you like. Formerly, the perception might have been that, or indeed, you know, some people may still perceive it to be like that, but I do believe that it's evolving into a different animal with, you know, strategic workforce planning and putting people first and that collegiate atmosphere that I've been pointing to in the course of my evidence here is something which you know, negates that perception that you're describing somewhat. That doesn't mean that that what you're pointing to isn't a feature of elements of the civil service, but I'd be reluctant to accept that it's a feature of the service in its entirety.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry, for your attendance. I wanted to ask first about agency workers. I don't know if you have a particular view on agency employment. So I put it to the Minister this week that the number of agency workers, according to their own stats, has increased by 76% in the last 3 years. Yet people always say, oh, we want to reduce the number of agency workers. Have you a view, looking at it almost, if you like, from both views, from the point of view of employees and from the point of view of the employer or management, what are the pros and cons of being an agency worker? I imagine there's more cons, but why do you think we have so many agency workers, you know, and how do we get more of those into proper long-term contracts?
Well, there are a number of reasons I would suggest. First of all, the VES scheme did see a lot of experienced people leave the civil service. The age profile of the service itself now, you know, significantly older. Technology has developed forward. The demands and capabilities are different. So there are people with a set of different skills that are possibly required, which may not be available to the civil service. So the only way to acquire those skills and capabilities quickly is to go to the market and get them, and the agency people provide that. Another thing in play here probably is the fact that some people want greater flexibility in respect to their employment, and agency work may provide that to them. Indeed, you know, this is not the place for it, but I could segue into a piece about the Good Jobs Bill and the flexibility that might arise there, but I won't. The issue I have with the agency working is that some of these people are in these jobs for 5, 6, I've heard up to 10 years in some cases. That suggests to me that there's actual job there. And if there's an actual job there, why would you continue to pay an agency an additional subvention to employ that person? which further suggests that there are issues around salary, which I've highlighted, and possibly terms and conditions of employment. All of these are issues, salary and terms and conditions of employment, stuff that we can address with the management of the Northern Ireland Civil Service. But a 71% increase in agency workers doesn't seem like a sustainable position going forward, and one which, you know, a good hard look at, you know, a good hard look at the structure of the workforce and a bit of very serious planning about what our needs and requirements are going forward should address. And I think we're on the cusp of that coming about here.
And in pure financial terms, just from when you talk to people, do agency workers get paid more? Obviously the agency is getting a cut as well, so it's costing the public purse more. But is there a downside? Are they missing out on like pension benefits and so on?
No. In terms of cost, they cost more,
yeah,
simply because the agency is, as you say, getting a cut.
Yeah.
These people are getting some of the entitlements, but not all of the entitlements. It isn't acceptable. It should be addressed, and addressing it, I think, is something which even in their silos, every minister, I think, is committed to doing. How they do it and how quickly they do it is, I think, the task of all of us, and to encourage them. You know.
The slow speed of recruitment is a factor then, I think, is what you're saying, that sometimes in needing particular skills brought in, and the agencies provide a way of getting around that?
Well, it's not that they have a way of getting around it, it's that they can provide it when it's needed.
Yeah.
And they can provide the particular skill set or capability level that's required when it's required. The Northern Ireland Civil Service can do this for itself with, as I've already pointed out, the strategic planning and the jobs families approach. And if we were to see an increase in the budgets, for the existing budgets for training, which, you know, each department has for its civil servants, a bit more thought and work going in that area, and additional resourcing, of course, would make a huge difference. It's going to have to be, there's no one magic bullet here for this issue of agency workers. That's 12%, you know, of the workforce. There's no one magic bullet. I think it's going to have to be a collective approach, and I think that Integrate provides that.
Well, I wanted to come on just to ask about Integrate. So it's partly operational, is that right, at the moment?
Yes.
And I mean, both yourself, both Carmel from NIPSA, Robert from FDA, and yourselves have spoken about civil servants wanting to deliver. And when I've asked about agility, about flexibility, you know, they've all said no. People recognise the need for that, you know, short term for task teams and mobility, and in theory, Integrate should help with that, and the opportunity for career paths, rather than people being feel they're stuck in a particular role, that there's greater ability to develop themselves. What is your experience of Integrate so far then, overall, and are there particular problems that you would want to highlight to us?
Well, my experience of Integrate so far, to be quite honest with you, is limited, right? But I have discussed with my colleagues, my trade union colleagues, about Integrate. They're enthused by the potential. They are concerned that it has been delayed and disrupted by the, if you like, the political situations over a number of years and the financial uncertainty. But they do see a huge potential for it. There is concern that the resourcing and the will to take it as far as it could be taken may, suffer somewhat if the resourcing, proves to be difficult to come by. But the potential is there. What has emerged to date appears to be very welcome across the trade unions, but again, that concern remains about future resources, the speed of progress, because if we're to achieve the transformation that's quite clearly required, things are going to have to speed up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no one else has indicated they wish to ask a question, so with that we will release you. Thanks, Jerry. We appreciate your coming to give us evidence, and keep an eye on if there's anything else you think would be beneficial to the committee in our inquiry into civil service. Please do let us know.
Thank you very much for your time.
Cheers. Okay, members, so we're now going to go back to to page 153 of the meeting pack, where we have correspondence from the Committee of Finance, Public Expenditure, Public Services Reform and Digitalisation, and the Taoiseach. That's one committee in the Oireachtas. I would say they need to.
Quite impressive, Chair.
It's an impressive list of responsibilities, but also they might want to consolidate it somewhat. The committee that is the Dáil Committee, has provided a copy of their Public Service Performance Report and associate process in the budgetary cycle. This is published annually. In May, June, and provides an annual review of public services against commitments set by each vote group in the revised estimates volume for the preceding years. I personally think this is really interesting, and I'm not sure how things would be marked up here. I would suggest we could share that for information with other committees if members are content, because I'm not totally sure people will be aware that this is done, and I think it's quite a useful piece of scrutiny. So members, at page 27, there's also a tabled pack for the Hansard transcript of oral evidence with the FDA, which took place at last week's meeting. This will be added to the evidence base in due course. Now, we have agenda item 10, which is the Marriage and Civil Partnership Bill, oral briefing. We are going to go into closed session. If members are content. Agreed?
Go ahead, Steve.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
Marion was here earlier. Agreement. I thought it was Marion that was here earlier.
No, it's Stephen.
Okay, members, I think we're back and open now, are we?
Yes.
Okay, we had a useful session there with the examiner statutory rules, a couple of additional questions I think that have been prompted for members, which I'm not sure we need to formally share them in writing with the department yet. We will have at post-summer an evidence session with the department. It may be worth us just flagging, so we'll bring in Steve Aiken. It may be worth us just flagging some of those questions about the powers in 1 and 2, just to say that we will be looking at this, and we would, if they have any additional early steers, that would be helpful. That's helpful. Okay, Dr. Aiken, Steve Aiken.
Chair, just to say, I've just got an AQW back from the Minister for Finance about direction on spending over the 45% limit. Just sent it out to the committee just for awareness.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as always, important to try and keep some degree of order. We will. That's what AOB is for, but we'll not stand in ceremony. We can come back to it perhaps at AOB. But members have heard what Steve said. Just in relation to the closed session we've just had, we may go to the department and ask a couple of those questions about about clauses 1 and 2 and the powers contained within them. Okay, members are content. We'll move on. At page 413 of the meeting pack, there is. Okay, well, I'll talk about that now. Page 413 of the meeting pack, the committee previously forwarded the written submission from NI Humanist to the Department of Finance for views on the issue raised, and there's a detailed response from the department. Comments will be reflected in the committee's report in the bill in due course. The committee has already agreed to invite humanist organisations to provide oral evidence in the bill, and this is due to take place on the 23rd of September. Members will have an opportunity to discuss the issues outlined at that time. So members, if we're agreed, we will add the department's response to the evidence base for the committee stage of the bill. At page 4 of the meeting pack, there is the Department of Finance's response to issues raised in the research, the RAISE research.
Sorry, apologies, Chair. I just wanted to raise a declaration of interest on your previous item about the humanist thing. They came and visited me, and I directed them to get in contact with you. So I just want to make that as a declaration of interest.
Okay. Members, we will, just on the, apologies, I'll bring up the relevant. Does anyone have anything they want to say about the responses we've had from the department, either in relation to the humanist matters or in relation to the issues that came up in the RAISE briefing? Anyone have any particular points they want to raise in relation to either? No.
Thank you.
Okay, in that case, we will move on, and everything will be added to the evidence base for the committee stage of the bill if members are agreed. Finally, at page 54 of the table pack, there's a Hansard transcript of last week's session with the Youth Assembly, and this will be added to the evidence base for the committee stage of the bill. Okay, Agenda item 11 is Fiscal Council Sustainability Report. We're getting an oral briefing from the Fiscal Council. So Hansard will report on this, members, not in real time, but they will listen back and report and publish their transcript. Page 424 of the meeting pack, there's a clerk's memo on this oral briefing from the Fiscal Council. Their background papers on relevant issues. These include a cover letter from Sir Robert Choate outlining the core findings of the Fiscal Sustainability Report. That is at page 430 of the pack. There is also the Sustainability Report itself, which is page 435, and most helpfully, and I think this is helpful, particularly for members of our committee, not that I believe in printing things unnecessarily, but for things like this, it is actually useful to have a hard copy, in my view. I generally don't believe in having printouts for their own sake, but this kind of thing is important. We have a hard copy. Thanks to the Council for that. So we're going to welcome via Zoom several members of the committee. We have several members of the Fiscal Council. Thus far we have Sir Robert Choate, who's obviously Chair of the Fiscal Council, Maureen O'Reilly, who's a member of the Fiscal Council, Professor Alan Barrett, who's also a member of the Fiscal Council, and Colin Pidgeon, who is a Senior Technical Analyst at the Fiscal Council. You are all very welcome. Your screen is dark. Sir Robert, I don't know if you can hear me, and if you can, do you want to give us an opening statement, Sir Robert? The joys of Zoom.
No picture.
No, Sir Robert is not in vision yet, so we'll just wait a second, members. What I'll just do is direct you while we're waiting to see if Sir Robert can get online. I'll just direct you to the Fiscal Council report, which does touch on some of what we've talked about today, including two pertinent issues, one of which is the calculation of need relative to Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland's funding position, where the Fiscal Council agree with or affirm the calculation that at the minute Northern Ireland is, both Scotland and Wales are funded relatively above their level of need compared to Northern Ireland, though there's some commentary about next steps after that. There's also useful analysis of the consequences and the legal position around operating without a budget, and also some of the consequences of, one of which, by the way, is the inability to bank receipts. And there's also some interesting analysis around the consequences of some of the adjustments to the funding, to the population calculations that came from NISRA. We don't as yet have Sir Robert,
we're not really sure what's happening.
Who is in darkness at the minute.
We've asked PI to see what they can do, but we may need to ask another council member to deliver the opening remarks.
I don't know if a council member wants to deliver an opening remark. You may not have it in front of you. If you don't have it in front of you, what we might do is start and ask a couple of questions, if that's okay, and then interrupt as and when Sir Robert goes live. Is that okay? Alan, Maureen and Colin, are you happy enough with that? If we start parrying questions and then we...
We'll do our honest to God best. We thought we were going to be best supporting actors rather than lead actors.
You're always best supporting actor. You're always best supporting actor and actress. But if we can alternatively just leave it a couple of minutes and wait for Sir Robert. We'll maybe do that and then we'll come back.
Chair, it might be worthwhile if we took a brief pause.
Yeah, we'll do that
and let Colin see if he can pin down where Sir Robert might be.
We'll do that. We'll just take a quick pause.
I've emailed him.
Okay. We'll do a quick pause and then we'll go into closed session. We'll just come back.
Go into a suspension for a minute or two.
Oh, there he is.
Here he is.
Oh, wait, we're okay. We're okay.
Perfect. We'll come back.
Panic over.
There we go.
Okay, we're back in?
We're back.
We're back, okay. The Magic Television, we have, good to see everyone. Thank you, Sir Robert. So we were just introducing where we are with the Sustainability Report and the very interesting report which came out last week, and obviously where we are with the absence of a budget, the recent Treasury Open Book Review, and finding out about all of that. So we would welcome from yourself, Sir Robert, an opening statement. As always, I hope you're surviving in the heat in London. We're on this side of the Irish Sea. We're stifled, but it's even worse in London. So, but we would welcome an opening statement, and then members indicate if you want to ask a question.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Chair. It's a great pleasure to join you, and obviously very happy to pick up on whatever issues from the report you're interested in. So maybe I'll just pluck out a few highlights by way of introduction. Obviously, the first one is that we've highlighted the challenges posed by the fact that we've entered the 26-27 financial year without an agreed budget, which is obviously not an optimal position in terms of effective management of the public finances and of the public expenditure and of the challenges that confront the executive, not even with a budget agreed for the current year, let alone obviously the ideal scenario of having a multi-year budget. I think the point that we've emphasised there, we've obviously gone through the mechanisms that are in place. It's not unique to not have a budget agreed at this stage, and there are vote of account arrangements which allow departments effectively to be able to spend at the beginning of the year. But we do highlight the risks of what happens if the period of not having an agreed budget extends too much further into the year. There are limits. Once the power to sort of set departmental budgets passes more to the permanent secretary of the Department of Finance, limits of 95% of previous year, effectively both in terms of cash and resource. The challenge also that that's not, those 95% limits are not simply referring to the DEL, a departmental expenditure limit, public services spending for which departments are responsible, but also for annually managed expenditure, which normally we don't worry a great deal about. But if you have unexpected pressures there, that can complicate things. You also have the challenge that departments can't essentially get access to the fees and charges revenues that they will be collecting. So there are a set of challenges and problems that arise the longer this period of failing to agree a budget goes on. The other thing, obviously, since we've written this, that it's worth perhaps a statement of the obvious. We and the executive are now, of course, dealing with in effect, shortly a new UK government, certainly a new Prime Minister, probably a new Chancellor, potentially, who knows, new Chief Secretaries to the Treasury, Secretaries of State, etc. So I think it would be fair to say that if you look back to the way in which the Treasury was willing to provide a short-term loan to cover the overspend last year and spread that over 3 years, relatively generous terms by the strict rules that they set themselves out, there must be some degree of uncertainty as to what a incoming administration and set of ministers, albeit of the same party in Westminster, would treat that. And Chair, I'm sure you'll be conscious that your former colleagues in the Treasury will be no doubt drafting briefing for incoming ministers as we speak, and that may be urging a tougher line later on in the financial year if it comes to the point, for example, at which Westminster has to legislate for the budget. So I think that's obviously one issue. Obviously, we have departments are at least at the moment able to operate with the departmental planning envelopes. These are indicative, not formalised in that sense, but at least to have some sense of the budget totals with which they would be likely to work in the event that a budget were to be agreed. That, rather like the Finance Minister's draft budget, is understandably relatively neutral in taking the previous year's settlements, adjusting for particular commitments, etc., and going forward. But there are clearly disagreements within the executive as to the realism of those indicative numbers for particular departments. So we don't yet have formal indications from the process that the Department of Finance goes through of asking departments to forecast how much they're spending this year. It's a little early for that, but all the indications are that you have ministers standing up and saying that they don't think they can operate within the current budgets. So in the context of that, the possibility of further overspends this year, as I say, a greater degree of uncertainty about what the response of the UK government might be if you have a whole lot of new personnel, ministerial in place, I think creates quite an uncertain environment. And basically sitting it out and saying, well, the Treasury bailed us out last time, don't agree, there's no point in rushing to agree a budget and leaving it later and later is not without risk. But obviously that's above my pay grade for how people want to approach that. Other things we've highlighted, and the Treasury Open Book review, I think, as we've said there, the big picture of highlighting the sorts of areas that essentially any administration in any jurisdiction should be thinking about in terms of, what you are spending on what's your scope for revenue raising, etc. It covers it raises a lot of the things that we've spoken to you on previous occasions about, the potential for greater fiscal effort. I think there are some areas, as I say, where we would, not necessarily go along with the particular analysis or calculations that the Treasury might have presented there, but the broad picture is one of highlighting all the efforts all the areas that we've discussed before where there's potential fiscal action to be taken. We've also looked briefly at the funding position for the executive relative to Scotland and Wales, which has obviously come more into the political conversation relatively recently. It's something that ministers have highlighted here, perhaps not entirely to the comfort of their counterparts in Scotland and Wales, perhaps, of noting that if you were to be funded at equivalent levels relative to need in Scotland and Wales, then there would be more money available. And the sorts of numbers that ministers have talked about, the arithmetic of that looks not unreasonable. But I think the argument, that we should be as overfunded relative to need as Wales and Scotland are, is not a line of argument that is likely to land terribly happily with the UK government, who might well conclude that the conclusion you should draw from that is that Scotland and Wales should be funded closer to need, but the arithmetic seems sensible enough. So I think just coming back to the overall picture, this was, we hoped, a opportunity to have a multi-year budget well aligned to a programme for government, being able to, set some important areas of long-term reform and for both the challenges of short-term budget management, not least around public sector pay and the unaffordability of matching percentage pay increases in the UK within the way in which the budget form operates, but clearly an environment in which there is much need to think about transformation, to think about revenue, to think about super parity and all those areas. An environment in which we're this far into a fiscal year without an agreed budget is not a great environment to be hopeful on that front. So maybe I'll leave it there. Colleagues may have things they wish to correct or augment.
And that's Alan or Maureen what's going. I'm sure they can correct or augment as we go. And please do indicate any other members of the council who wish to jump in on a question. I'll start, and members do indicate. Several members have indicated already. I suppose, first of all, Sir Robert, you mentioned diplomatically that not having an agreed budget is not an optimal position. That's notwithstanding arguments ministers will make and about relative funding levels, and you've acknowledged that there is a degree of coherence about at least the numbers in terms of comparisons with Scotland and Wales. But either, notwithstanding that, it's not an optimal position to not be without a budget, and there are consequences. Is it worth spelling out, or would you be able to give us a bit of a sense of the kinds of consequences that arise from civil servants operating without a budget? And I suppose in general terms, the kinds of things that happen. In some ways, obviously, we can't tell because we can't see into every single spending programme and decisions being made by every single fund holder or everybody who's a senior responsible owner of the smallest and largest projects. But it would be helpful for you just to give us a sense of what operating without a budget in this context means.
Well, I think maybe you could highlight as this a sort of qualitative and quantitative risk. So the first one is perhaps more that at this stage, if you are civil service, indeed you're from a minister trying to manage a departmental budget at this stage of the year, you're needing to take an important set of decisions about the way in which you're deploying your resources, how you're using that to achieve the objectives that you've got. And if at this stage you're fundamentally not certain what the amount of money you have to play with overall is, then you are likely, depending, perhaps officials more than ministers, to fear that you need to take a more cautious view on the grounds that at the end of the day, you discover yourself with only 95% of the available resources to play for, or not getting the access to the accruing resources, that's the fees and charges income, that you just don't, you're not going to be deploying the resources that you might ultimately have as effectively as you would be if you've got that level of uncertainty at this stage. I think the second, the more quantitative thing is literally that you could, if there isn't an agreement on budget, the amount of money that you have will ultimately fall short of what you would have if you'd agreed it, because either those 95% limit or those 95% limits are going to bite, and they apply both to cash and to access to resource, so the budget cover within the Treasury's public expenditure controls, and also the potential loss of the accruing resources, I think could be around £3 billion, which is not insignificant in comparison with the total amount of resource that the total size of the Dell budget. I think the other, going to the far end of the potential calendar, if there isn't an agreement and the UK government or Westminster ends up having to legislate for the budget. Now, that again is not unprecedented. We've had it both in a situation when Stormont wasn't functioning, and also when you had the effectively caretaker ministers situation, then the UK government can ultimately step in. The UK government has in the past been reluctant to take politically controversial major issues, for example, around significant changes in the rates, the eternal issue of domestic water charges, etc. But I don't think you can rule out the possibility that an incoming government might want to take a tougher view on that and deploy the power if it's going to have to use it anyway to legislate for a budget. And in terms of managing the ongoing relationship, I suspect Treasury officials will be warning an incoming Chancellor or Chief Secretary that you only have one chance to make a first impression.
Yeah, indeed. So just on the point about the accruing resources, because I think that's something that's possibly not completely understood. At the minute, there is a contingency letter from the Department of Finance Permanent Secretary, which advises his accounting officer colleagues to plan on the basis of a 95% contingency. As of the 1st of August, that will become a more crystallised legal default, and it will become even more important if accounting officers can have no reasonable expectation of a Budget Act being passed, so that might happen later in the financial year. But that 95%, I think the numbers that are indicated from the letters and the report that is indicated in your very helpful sustainability report, the reduction is over £1 billion based on the contingency letter, but it would be in effect greater than that if there was no Budget Act at all, because they wouldn't be able to use accruing resources either. So because the total amount of accruing resources, which includes things like rates income, is significantly greater than, is a bit more than 5% of the overall budget, it would actually be an even bigger cut than that. Is that right? It would because they wouldn't be able to spend any of those. So that would be even more. They would be able to spend even less than the 95%.
I think that's my understanding. Colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, that the vote on account will give you the authority to spend the 95%, but the vote on account doesn't provide the authority to retain and use the receipts. And Section 59 doesn't provide the Perm Sec at Finance with the authority to do that. So yes, you have the 95%, but also, as you say, there's a greater hit in effect at the point at which you conclude that there is no prospect of a Budget Act. Well, again, colleagues may correct me on exactly how one concludes whether there is no prospect of a Budget Act. Maybe that's simply an issue that's taken on the basis of the amount of time that has elapsed. But yes, it's the combination of those 95% limits and the restriction on using resources that departments raise to cover the cost of the services they provide that provides, a big fiscal risk of pushing the period of not agreeing a budget right to its ultimate conclusion.
Okay, and just before bringing members in, the final one from me, or final couple from me on the relative need point, and the Fiscal Council does make clear that executive are not unreasonable whenever they point out that Scotland and Wales are funded further above their level of need than Northern Ireland is currently. But the report makes clear, or your view is that is, though it's not unreasonable for the executive to make that argument, I think the word you use is it would not necessarily be good policy on the part to increase Northern Ireland's funding. Do you think it's likely to be an argument that is that they're going to engage with in the absence of a budget, the UK government? And certainly worth saying that personally I would want them to engage with it and would certainly want more funding, but there's a question about whether they're going to. Do you think, in a different line, you say they're unlikely to be receptive? Why is that? Why are they unlikely to be receptive?
Well, I think if you and there's as we know, the relative funding levels to some degree are a historic accident based on the amount of funding that was in place per head at the time of that the Barnett formula came into play, and what's happened to overall spending levels and to relative population rates at that level. This is also, of course, slightly problematic to do this in that we don't have a sort of completely rigorous, up-to-date cross-comparison estimates of need. We've obviously done, and we've discussed many times before, the 124 estimate. Jerry Holtham came up with a very similar number. Obviously, either we or he would come up with a slightly different number if you had agriculture in or out. But the big picture, which if you have the report in front of you on page 26, is that by luck or judgment, we're in a situation where, broadly speaking, the three jurisdictions are each being funded at roughly 23 to 25% above equivalent per head spending in England in comparable areas. In Northern Ireland, that's roughly in line with need. In Wales, and even more so in Scotland, that's well ahead of need. If you were a Martian landing and being confronted with those numbers, I suspect you would conclude that this is telling you that Scotland and Wales are overfunded rather than that Northern Ireland is underfunded. But that said, I can quite understand if one is needing to make an argument that is one that might any port in a storm. So why not to take that one?
I suppose if I was thinking about it politically and laterally from the perspective of executive ministers, they might say, well, how likely is it that we assume it's going to be Andy Burnham, new Prime Minister, is going to say to in Scotland and Wales, where his party are competing for, I'm not asking the Fiscal Council to comment on the politics of it, but where his party are first of all created the Barnett formula back in the 70s, they are competing for votes and trying to elect MPs in Scotland and Wales, that he's going to say to them, well, actually, you're overfunded relative to your need, and Northern Ireland is underfunded, not necessarily below need, but it's underfunded relative to you based on current calculations. Isn't the executive reasonable in saying, well, actually, if there's a political dynamic that is kind of perpetuating that position re Scotland and Wales, and good luck to them, why shouldn't we make the political argument comparatively with them?
Well, it's absolutely for ministers to decide what political arguments they want to deploy with the Treasury, for both presentational purposes and in the hope of persuading them to take a different view. I think the fact that we've had the Barnett formula, I think most commentators externally would say that one of the reasons why we have not had a more rigorous needs-based formula over the last 20 to 30 years is because of the consequences that it would have, in particular for relative funding levels in Scotland. And there are quite a lot of seats over which parties competing for power at the UK level have to play with, which is not an argument, obviously that applies in quite the same way in Northern Ireland. So you can understand why a UK government would be reluctant to look at that chart and say, decisive action to reduce that overfunding in Scotland would be a politically appealing thing. But that's, as I say, that's not a council view, but I think that would be a view of historians of the Barnett formula, perhaps.
One very final quick factual one for me. You mentioned page 27. It mentions that Northern Ireland is at about we're just at about 124, 125 now, which is just basically at or around our level of need. Scotland and Wales are above. In 2018-19, we were at 140%. Elsewhere on page 24, there's an interesting chart which shows that we were again above our relative need level, but Scotland was, because of the Barnett formula, further above its need level in terms of funding. Is it the case that we have moved more dramatically above need at times because of one-off funding packages that have emerged? Is that why that has happened in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I think predominantly the impact of the move from the 18-19 position to where we've been for the last few years is a combination of one-off political package funding, lapsing, essentially coming to the end of its time-limited period. Plus, you had the underlying effect of the Barnett squeeze with relatively a period of relatively rapid growth in spending at the UK level, which has an effect on those premia anyway. So it is, as you know, the sort of irony that when the UK is engaged in austerity, that actually tends to improve the relative position for the devolved because of the way in which the Barnett formula works. So I think the reason that Northern Ireland, the challenge for the executive writ large over a period of time is not that it's suddenly shot under need, and that's why we've got a whole lot of budget, sticking within budget problems. You've come from a position of being relatively highly above need quite rapidly to a position when you're close to it, and you've now got the challenge in particular around public sector pay of the way in which the Barnett formula works. If the UK government decides to spend money on giving an X% pay increase to public sector workers in England, the Barnett consequentials that arise from that don't fully fund it in Northern Ireland. That's an issue we're going to come back and look at. We're doing work on those pay pressures for a future report, which we'll look forward to sharing with you.
Great. Okay, going to bring in other members now. And I should just, before I bring it down for a second, congratulate the Fiscal Council on, I don't think it's royal assent yet, but becoming law. And you're probably all relieved that all the provisions that people, me basically, and others were trying to make you do were unsuccessful. But in any case, I hope you enjoy being legally formalised whenever it gets confirmed. Dan, for say.
Legally formalised and focused, Chair. What better combination?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here. I was going to lead with that and say that we hadn't seen you since the legislation passed, and look forward to working further with you in the future. You've got the legal status. So in terms of this paper and just the general conversations around it, there's much chat about the hundreds of millions of pounds of savings that keep being highlighted that could be made. But I just want to ask your view as the Fiscal Council. What value of those do you think are genuinely achievable, rather than just being considered as notional, and how much do you think would be achievable in the short term?
Well, we've not done a detailed bottom-up examination of those within individual departments. That would be beyond our scope of knowledge. I think one of the areas where we noted in the analysis that's in the Treasury's open book report is that some of the way, for example, that potential savings calculated within the health area, the choice of needs comparison number that's been used in that report doesn't seem to be immediately one that matches up with the sort of numbers that you can see in PESA. So it may be that in that area, for example, it does cast doubt on the plausibility of some of the scale of the savings that the Treasury is suggesting in that point. You do, of course, there have also been savings that have been brought forward and proposed by departments as well that have been brought to the Department of Finance, including some in health as well. There's a challenge always whenever people are saying we are going to make this number of savings, as distinct from that number of savings isn't plausible, is that you have to be careful about what the baseline is. So in some cases, departments would cite we could save X, but actually that's relative to the bids and what they think they need rather than to the allocation that they have. So sometimes it's an overstatement of the amount that's actually available, in terms of improving the budget position and whittling away any potential overspend. But colleagues may have other views on the broader landscape of potential savings.
Yeah,
then hello, Chair and committee members. It was just to say, that there are parts of that report. I mean, we didn't, obviously there was detail in behind that we need to look at, but a key driver is that higher share of spending on pay. Around 60% of the resource budget on pay, and that's something, as Robert said, and we're looking into in more detail around the implications, not only of the value of that, but of the implications on pay parity, but also the revenue raising options are sitting there as well in terms of charges and new revenues and what that could raise in terms of additional revenue as well. So, you know, the overarching view on the open book review is that parts of it seemed sound and other parts needed some more detailed work.
Thank you. And whenever the huge numbers of savings that others are proclaiming should be able to be made here are of such significant scale, I think it's just important to note that, you know, you can't just click your fingers and make those types of changes, especially as you say, Maureen, whenever you've got 60% of your resource budget on pay to make significant savings. The implications could be absolutely catastrophic. In terms of the position that we're in without an agreed budget, obviously it's not where we want to be, and you've already outlined a number of the operational consequences of that. But if we had moved forward with ministers agreeing to a budget, to the draft multi-year budget that was laid out earlier in this year, and we've had different departments and different ministers outlining what that would mean in terms of the closure of certain services, wide-scale potential redundancies, what is the council's assessment of the impact if we had have agreed a budget for 26-27 with the current funding package available?
I think at the overall level, as I recall, the sort of the real spending, the total real spend would have been broadly flat, and colleagues will correct me if I've misremembered. So that's not to say that there aren't particular pressures in individual departments. And as Maureen highlighted, one of the big challenges, clearly one of the main drivers of the reasons that departments have been finding it difficult to remain within budget in recent years has been the impact of public sector pay. And as I say, the problem that the amount of additional resource that comes into the block grant when the UK government increases, say, health pay or in other services for which the executive is responsible, an equivalent amount of money to deliver the same X% pay increase doesn't materialise, and that makes things that much more difficult for the executive to manage. I think as I say, the problem of continuing not to agree a budget is that whatever you describe as being the challenges that would have been posed for departments had everybody just signed up to the draft budget that was there, that if you're in a situation where you only get to spend 95% of it, potentially there's also the loss of accruing resources as well. You can be in a situation where the outcome for public services is even worse than it would be if you had signed up to what you or others might well regard as being not by any means an ideal or a sufficient budget in the first place. So there's always here this danger of the best being the enemy of the good.
I think it's worse than not being an ideal budget. I think that it's well short, and we saw, and just to declare, I work as APS for the Education Minister, but the Education Minister specifically in that department had outlined that if we move forward with that, we could be looking in the face of about 6,700 teachers losing their jobs. Like, the consequences would have been absolutely dire and catastrophic for the delivery of public services here in Northern Ireland. I wanted to touch also just quickly on the reform of the public sector workforce. We have an inquiry. We've been having evidence on it in terms of this committee on the performance and culture within the Northern Ireland Civil Service, and I just want to ask the council's view on how urgent you consider that it is that we reform the public services in terms of looking at size, scale and how they're delivered.
That, again, colleagues may have views, and it's not something that we've looked specifically at that in that inquiry. And we've looked in the past at health in particular, in looking at sustainability on that front. The emphasis has obviously been on transformation. Some earmarked funding for that, but relatively small relative to overall total. So whether that's commensurate with the task of the scale of reforms that you might think are necessary in different areas of the public services, you might think that transformation should be more rooted into the core budgets rather than a relatively small add-on. But it would be obviously interesting to see what your inquiry on that concludes there. But again, Maureen or colleagues may have views on that.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I mean, just to come in there, I do think, Diane, our forthcoming report on pay parity and trying to understand that a lot better would actually be quite informative in terms of structure of public sector workforce and pay. And, you know, obviously what we're trying to look at is what's bargainable and what's not, and what the implications are then, you know, in terms of pay parity. But, you know, the kind of core of that is trying to understand, you know, where within the public sector certain roles, jobs lie. And I think that would actually be it would be an important, I think, contribution to understanding then arguably where reform might take place.
Yeah, that sounds really useful. When will that be? Maureen, have you an estimated date for that report?
I have to defer to Colin because he's the one doing all the hard work on this one. But
well, our aspiration is that we're having our annual conference in September, and we'd certainly hope to have a good deal of material out at that stage as well. I mean, obviously, you'll be aware that you know, employment levels are changing and have been moving quite a bit recently, and I think I'm right in saying that the Department for Education has had a relatively rapid increase in staff numbers over the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, and that's good if that's out in September as well in terms of our inquiry. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay,
thank you.
Tennyson.
Thanks, you,
Just to clarify there, Chair, what I think the intention is that the report might be staged. So while there might be an initial report in September, it's unlikely to be the full detailed report unless Sir Robert really drives me very hard over the summer.
Colin has the understandable caution of a person who's actually trying to write it rather than to, you know, busk. So yes, but we would certainly hope to have some interesting things to say by September. And but one of the challenges here is actually getting the data and being able to drill down and get comparable information on staff numbers. Obviously, you're trying to look at comparability with England, relative pay levels, grade composition, etc. There's a lot to have to dig into, and you do not have consistent data sources across all of these areas, which makes the challenges of drawing clear lessons not straightforward and much tougher for Colin and his colleagues to provide us with the material we're working with.
Yeah, Alan, you wanted to come in as well just before I go to Owen?
Yeah, just a quick comment on the point about culture and reform of the civil service. I mean, just to say, I mean, I think every country in the world practically deals with this, and there is this sort of what would you say, sense outside of the civil service for people looking in that every civil service is sort of slow, sluggish, conservative, so on and so forth. I think the truth is actually, you know, quite different. But again, a challenge civil services have throughout the world is they have to compete in the labour market with everybody else. And in a whole range of settings, because productivity increases through automation and a whole range of things, the cost of the civil service, in a sense, can raise over time because it can be more difficult to get productivity improvements in the civil service. So there is this sort of ongoing tension, you know, in a sense. And again, it's a problem across the world. But I think that one of the new things that has started entering discussions of civil service reform is, you know, in the same way AI has been discussed in every context, that there are possibly productivity improvements and enhancements that may not have been achievable previously, but now might be coming online. And that, you know, the health sector, for example, is one of those areas where there is a sort of an entire window opening up, you know, but everything from hospital administration, you know, through the reading of scans and everything like that. So I think this, you know, this is something that is there throughout the world. The discussion is evolving, and I think, again, you know, for Northern Ireland, I think it's just to be important of that broader, be aware of that broader context.
Okay, great. Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for being with us to give evidence. Just returning to the question around relative need, Sir Robert. So obviously, when the needs-based adjustment was put in place originally back in early 2024, we were told that it was a fiscal floor, in a sense that it was a level at which Northern Ireland would never dip below. Some of us said it felt a bit more like a fiscal ceiling, and were chastised by Treasury for making that suggestion. In your report, you acknowledge that in 2026-27, Northern Ireland is sitting at about 1-3% of spending in England, and that's about £170 million short of what our relative need ought to be. So can I ask two questions, really? The first is, in terms of the impact on population, what does the projection look like, and what impact is that likely to have in the coming years, presuming there's no intervention from government? And the second is, what would the alternative approaches be to ensure that we never fall below our level of need?
Well, I think there has to be a degree of rough tuning as well as fine tuning here. If you're setting spending reviews and block grant settlements, that's obviously an appropriate time to look at the levels of spending, look at the comparabilities to see where that puts you, to reach judgments, for example, on whether you're above or below the 124. Therefore, what the scale of the top up on future Barnett consequentials should be. So 124, to get you to that point, 5% above it. I think I've highlighted possibly, at a couple of these sessions before, that I always thought that, that the possibility of there being a significant revision to population projections could juggle these numbers around. I think the difference between 123 and 124, is not a hugely consequential one, and that is part of the noise that is inevitably built into this system. And when you get to a spending review, there's an opportunity to be back and with that. I don't think you would necessarily want a world, for example, in which had the population projections. So the reason the population projections have had this impact is that there's essentially been a downward revision to net inward migration. That affects England more than it does Northern Ireland. It changes the relative population levels and moves the premium of spending per head in the opposite direction. I don't think you would necessarily want a world in which the ONS had woken up and said, actually, net migration has gone up, therefore the premium has gone up. And for the Treasury, I don't think you'd be very happy if the Treasury came along and said, right, we shall take some money away from you because those numbers have moved in that way. So I think you have to accept that there is going to be a bit of volatility in the way in which this thing works, and it's not entirely straightforward, as we've discussed before, to calculate need. It's not even entirely straightforward to calculate the actual level of the premium. But as I say, the impact of the population projections is often something that people don't pay a great attention to. It can have an impact, and it has on this occasion. But I think if you said you want the system to automatically adjust for that at high frequency, you might want to be careful what you wish for.
Understand though. Obviously, from my perspective, I would want to guarantee that it's not going to go below the 124 at any point. But no, that makes sense, Sir Robert. Moving on then to the Treasury's open book review. You touched on this in answer to one of Diane's questions, and in your report you referenced that there were questions raised around data quality, methodology and like-for-like comparisons. Could I ask you just to elaborate about what some of those questions or disagreements that the Council may have had with Treasury might have been?
Well, I think the main one, as we highlighted, as Diane was mentioning, or in conversation with Diane, was around health. So the reports suggesting 152% higher per head spending on health than in England, which didn't immediately look as though that was obviously comparable with the figures you get from PESA, which is the public expenditure statistical analysis that's produced by the Treasury. The latest ONS country and regional analysis points to spend per head on health being around 6% higher. So quite where that number came from, I'm not sure. So I think there's some there's some elements of this that I think and I'm not suggesting we should have done, but if we'd seen it in draft, we might have said that there were a few things that they might want to go back and look at before finalising something. But that said, I mean, the overall analysis of structural pressures around spending in some areas obviously being above, the level implied by, they were emphasising more the average level of need, so above 124. But I think you really, in terms of thinking about what's sensible in different sectors, would need a more disaggregated approach than that suggests. As Maureen has also highlighted, the relatively high public sector pay bill is a structural issue, not just in where you are now, but in the way it interacts with the Barnett formula. And as long as Northern Ireland has a relatively large public sector pay bill, for whatever combination of reasons that may be. There's going to be an affordability problem if the UK government is increasing its own pay bill, which means needing to take choices around pay parity, around the scope of finding savings to maintain pay parity from elsewhere, what you might do on revenue, etc. And then on the revenues point, again, the Treasury is in broad terms making a point that we have often discussed the committee before, that the executive has made super parity choices in some areas to provide more generous provision or less onerous receipts collection, charging mechanisms. Those are fundamentally perfectly reasonable choices for the executive or for any jurisdiction to make, but they have arithmetic consequences when you're dealing with a budget that is a number largely dictated by what you're getting from the Treasury. So we certainly do, so there were some eyebrows raised about some of the particular examples or calculations that were in there, but I wouldn't say that meant that the overall assessment of the areas that the executive needs to look at, as any administration confronted with this system would need to look at, is there.
And based on those differences of opinion, would the council then dispute the headline 3.3 billion figure that the open book exercise reported?
Well, I think if you're on that basis, it would not be that high if you take that health example, for example, as being there. But the Treasury itself is not suggesting that the executive would or could or should try to seek to make a fiscal adjustment of 3.3 billion. So in a sense, whether it's helpful to come up with a very large number that people look at and say, crikey, that doesn't seem very plausible given the overall total, when you're not actually suggesting you do all of that. It's not necessarily the most helpful way to frame the analysis to encourage fiscal effort, rather than to make people say, well, crikey, that looks very implausible. We shouldn't pay as much attention to this analysis as we should.
Yeah. Well, that's helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Brian Kingston.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the Council for your helpful report and your independent analysis. First of all, in terms of the level of need, the levels in Scotland and Wales were set, I think, in 2010 in the Holton review then. Ours has been updated. You also mentioned about the Treasury assesses and publishes estimates of the levels of need. So are you saying, or is government saying, that the levels in Scotland and Wales are still at that 105 or 105 in Scotland, 115 in Wales? Or has government come up with another figure, or Treasury?
No, so I mean the estimates of the actual spending premium or funding premium over comparable spending are relatively up-to-date numbers that come from Treasury publication. As you say, the Northern Ireland figure is relatively up-to-date. We updated Jerry Holtham's analysis. Jerry Holtham then looked at it as well and came up with broadly the same number. The other two are more out of date, and there hasn't been an exercise across all the jurisdictions to do a needs analysis of that sort. I think it will be quite interesting. The bookie's favourite as the new Prime Minister is obviously quite interested in devolution within England, and maybe this is going to start bringing greater attention more broadly to the comparability of needs estimates, of needs assessment across funding of different parts of the UK. So maybe there will be more appetite for this, but there's not been a recent level playing field comparison of need for each jurisdiction done at the same time and all the same data.
Okay, no, thank you for being clear on that. So, but I am reading on page 24 of your report. It says the Treasury periodically assesses and publishes estimates of the actual level of funding premium. Well, you're talking about the actual amount then?
That's right. That's the amount they're getting, not the amount they quote unquote should get. So that's So as I say, if you go to the chart on page 26, the fact that everybody is at roughly 123 to 125 is sort of contemporaneous data on a comparable basis, more so than the needs numbers.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at that. I think a reasonable person would expect that the larger devolved regions would have a greater economy of scale, so you'd expect Scotland to have a greater economy of scale, Wales less so, and Northern Ireland less so, just because of we're a smaller region and we're more spread out and we're detached from the mainland. So,
which is consistent, obviously, with the shape of those lines, broadly speaking. That the smaller the place, the higher the relative level of need. But there's a lot else going on in that, and issues of rurality, population structure, dependence on social security benefits, etc. But as you can see, it is indeed the case that Scotland, England has the lowest level of need, then Scotland, then Wales, then Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and would Treasury argue that some things are not factored in here? I mean, when you've come up with these figures, I mean, is defence factored in? I've heard the Finance Minister talk about agriculture not being factored in, social security. Do you feel everything is being included here?
Well, the analysis we did, and there'll be more detail of this in the report that we produced, and indeed the one that Jerry Holtham was asked to do after we updated his numbers. And we've tried to focus on those areas for which obviously the Barnett formula applies, because that's the area where you're trying to see whether the funding is in line with comparable spending. And there are obviously some areas of spending that are not Barnettable. And therefore you don't, when the UK government increases spending in that area, it doesn't feed through to the UK budget. In terms of agriculture, as I recall, I've not got that report with me. If you have agriculture in, you end up with a higher estimate of need, but you'd also end up with a higher premium as well. As I recall, if you have agriculture in, and others will correct me, you go from 124 to 127 or 128, but you may end up with the denominator. You'd end up with the denominator moving as well.
Yeah. Okay. And I know this is not long published. Has Treasury responded to it, or are you expecting them to respond, or are they staying silent on it?
I wouldn't. They haven't been in touch, and I wouldn't necessarily have expected them to be so on this. We wouldn't typically ask for sort of formal response on that. So no, there's no further update to find unless they've communicated anything to you that I'm not aware of.
Yeah. But your analysis for the current financial year is that Northern Ireland is actually, as Owen was saying, is below its level of need. The funding that we were receiving is 123.
As I say, if you look mechanically at the impact of the population changes, then as I say, because you're looking here at funding per head. And as a premium, if you have something which changes the relative size of the population in England and Northern Ireland, that then changes the premium. But as I say, this is a small difference, but it just does highlight the fact, in a way, it's a warning not to be, to try to be too precise or to place, a weight upon these numbers that they can't sustain, given that 124 is an estimate around which reasonable people could differ in terms of whether it should be a bit higher or a bit lower than that, and you have a population change which moves it up and down. So back to the conversation with Owen, there's a world in which you have a fiscal framework which very precisely shifts the funding numbers to respond to changes in the premium, but departments need to plan with a degree of certainty. And while on this occasion you might say, well, you need a little bit more money to get you back to 124, I'm not sure you'd be in a world in which the ONS comes out with a different population projection and you're at 126 and them saying, right, thank you, we'll have 170 million back, and which department's going to pay for that? So, as I say, I think you have to accept some degree of rough tuning rather than fine tuning in making the fiscal framework operate.
Okay, thank you. Good chair.
Okay.
No one else is indicated.
No one else is Deirdre, yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much just for your update so far in the report. And I suppose to just set out, I know, Robert, you touched on in the report that doing the comparative analysis with Scotland and Wales won't really go anywhere with Treasury, and I think that just demonstrates that we're the least thought of area across the different jurisdictions, and I think this just reinforces that point, and that there's a bigger politic within Whitehall, again, that doesn't really look at the interests of people here. So I just think that's something that I know we have been saying for a long time, and this just confirms it. My other issue is around looking at going forward and even looking at the full fiscal framework, so moving from the interim to the full one as well. And there's a lot of talk in terms of budget sustainability and revenue raising, but that's always looked at in terms of the context of the executive, rather than looking at Whitehall and policy responsibility that they have. So I'm keen to see if there are opportunities in terms of the full fiscal framework. Could we be looking, because if we're going to look properly at sustainability in terms of our finances and fiscal policy and looking at issues of growth, we need to look at where the responsibilities for those sit. And a large part of that, when you look at the tax revenue, for example, sits in Westminster. Only, I think it's less than 5% of it sits here within the executive's control. So do you believe that there are opportunities, even beyond the Barnett discussion and the concerns that there are with Barnett or the needs-based formula, that we could be looking at those wider issues as part of a full fiscal framework? And what do you believe the appetite around that is? And I suppose my other question is I suppose as English politics becomes more insular looking, do you see any dangers or concerns lying ahead in terms of any other societal risks that we may have in terms of what that could look like then in terms of inflation and tax policy going forward, particularly because we are on an island here, and what that means north and south as well in terms of fiscal instability versus sustainability. So that was my first kind of area, and then the second one was on the Hotham methodology and the whole area around need. And I know it's not going to deliver billions of
You do
pounds.
the first one first and then do
If you
Hotham
want,
after. Is
yeah.
that all right?
Yeah,
Just because
okay, yeah,
just
of
to
course,
make it
sorry.
a more, and then is that okay, Robert? And then we'll go back to Hotham and Need.
Yeah, no, sure. Well, obviously, there's plenty as our near namesake, the Fiscal Commission looked at a while back. There's clearly a potential debate over the possibility of having greater devolution of tax raising powers to the executive, to the Assembly, as has been the case in Scotland and Wales, which would obviously give greater opportunity for the executive to structure the tax system in a way that delivered the amount of money that they thought was appropriate, that delivered the sorts of incentives and behavioural impacts that they wanted to see, etc. And obviously, income tax, property transactions taxes, landfill have been the sorts of areas that have been devolved more elsewhere. I think the point, to bear in mind there is that the price you pay for greater freedom to structure the tax system and the overall tax take and the composition of the tax take and the incentive effects of the tax system, that comes along with a greater degree of risk in terms of whether the loss of the block grant, as you're raising more of that money yourself, goes in the right direction for you. And roughly speaking, that problem turned out to be different in Scotland and Wales, where Scotland had to raise taxes to a degree to stand still in terms of the overall amount of revenue, whereas Wales did relatively well. So one has to bear in mind that there are risks that go alongside those potential changes. In terms of changes in the UK scene, clearly. Changes in, if we have a new Chancellor, a new Prime Minister, the next budget might look different from how it would have done under previous management. Not for me to say in which direction that would be, but if it turns out that they make decisions to either, increase or cut spending, that will have consequences for the Barnett situation. They may change the structure of the tax system at the UK level as well. As I say, I think one interesting area is that we know, if it is Andy Burnham, that he has a particular interest in the devolution of powers and finances within England as well as more broadly, and whether that changes the nature of the conversation or brings in a greater willingness to discuss where the appropriate amount of tax and spend power lies in different areas of the UK and within England as well. That may bring more things into the realms of the possible than would otherwise have been the case.
Thank you. And the other bit was just around the wholesome methodology, which obviously looks at quantifying need. As you say, it looks at things like demographics and socio-economic changes and differences in the different areas. But obviously the cost of providing services here structurally is higher. And I know one of the demonstrations was around policing and security issues and stuff. So it's just in terms of, is there any work that you believe could or should be done to kind of look at those structural issues? Because obviously health and education are some of our biggest areas of spend. And obviously the structure then, the cost, I suppose, difference there. So it's just to see your thoughts around that as well. Beyond beyond.
It's an area that you can bring different sorts of methodology to. I think it was interesting that, when we were trying to think about sustainability, we went back to some Holtham work of quite a while back, tried to update it, bring new data to that, adjust for the fact that there had been some changes, for example, the devolution of policing and justice, and to take that on board. Then the executive asked, or Department of Financing asked Jerry to go back and kick the tyres again, and came up with broadly the same number in aggregate. I think within that, there were some areas where he would have come up with higher estimates than our effort, offset by some areas with lower ones. There are particular areas where you can use the methodology that's essentially saying, well, if you're thinking about health or you're thinking about education, obviously the age structure of the population, the size structure of the population, in terms of the cost of providing services, rurality is important as well. The policing and justice one is always a tricky one, because it's hard to provide sort of variables that you can do a straightforward comparison because of evidently the unique historical circumstances in Northern Ireland and what that implies about the cost of policing and security there. So you can certainly go back to that, and we pointed in our report to different ways you could approach some of the calculations around, for example, agriculture and policing and justice, and you can end up with different numbers. So it's an area where more work could be done. I'm not clear that if you did more work, I would be confident in which direction it would push the overall number.
Alan, I think I wanted to just go in that too. You see Alan's got that.
Yeah, so just a quick follow on Deirdre's question. I really struggle, I have to say, with the needs assessment. And I think I may have put it to the committee in the following way before. I mean, when the 124 was in a sense adopted, if we really believed the needs assessment, there's a sense in which the problem of apparent underfunding should have been solved. Now, in my head, there's two reasons why the problem didn't seem to have been solved. One, there's something wrong with the needs assessment. Or is it the case that Northern Ireland is actually getting enough money? It's just spending it really badly, that there are just sort of gross inefficiencies. And in all truth, I don't know really where the answer lies. I think it's very positive, though, that we're having the discussion and trying to chip away at what precisely is the problem. And, as a result, what's the solution? So back to some of the earlier discussion, is it about public sector reform? Is it all about transformation? It may be, but we really need to understand an awful lot more about, well, what's the scope for that? Or is it the case that the needs, how they're being assessed, how this is being approached, that the methodology is simply not capturing the challenges that are there in Northern Ireland? And I think those are some of the issues that Brian Harvey was touching on. So I think there is a huge amount of additional need, no pun intended, in terms of the additional analysis in this. But I do think, and even the reaction to the Treasury's exercise, I think it's very positive, sort of from a Northern Ireland perspective, that we're interrogating the public finances to this degree. It probably would have been good to have been doing this for the past 10 or 15 years. I think a lot of the political and intellectual energy went into getting those sort of non-Barnett top-ups over that period. We're in a different zone now, but we really do need to get a sort of a clearer understanding of whether or not the needs measurement is faulty or flawed in some shape or form, or if it's all about inefficiencies. And of course, the truth may lie somewhere between those two things.
In there, I can't see a hand raiser, so apologies that I haven't done that. But just to say, and I think that this links in with Alan's point, links in with the fact that there isn't a comparability, at least in approach or timing, in terms of that comparison with Scotland and Wales, which is arguably unhelpful because there's also the suspicion that something's done differently. So I think not having some kind of a comparable approach, or at least some understanding of the differences, doesn't help in terms of trying to think around what that level of need means.
Okay. You want to come back in there? Do you have other questions?
No, it was just one I was going to ask. It was probably more because we are on an island in terms of fiscal policy more broadly, and looking at these issues around any, I suppose, threats or opportunities that there may be for greater engagements, between the British government and the Irish government, whether that is around issues of greater harmonisations or where there may be divergence. Do you see any potential opportunities in terms of looking at sustainability here and growth that could enhance the work that we're doing through the executive?
We haven't looked at those issues specifically. I don't know whether Alan or Maureen would have initial thoughts on that.
Look, I mean, I guess the big one that floated around for a long time was, of course, the corporation tax, which was really, I guess, about aligning the corporation tax in Northern Ireland with what applied in the Republic. Now, I know that went off the agenda for various reasons, but if there was a sort of a very significant and chunky proposal, I think that really would have been the one. And whether or not it has any sort of ongoing support, you'd be in a better position, I think, to say rather than me.
Yeah, and I think probably there's been obviously the VAT debate on tourism more recently, and obviously that is something that I think there's something communication today about that not happening. But there are areas where arguably it does become more challenging because on something like that the differential is so great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. No one else has indicated that they wish to ask a question. We look forward to hearing more about the pay comparison point. Hopefully the next time we see you all, we will have a budget, which would be a fine thing. And if not, we'll definitely have to see you again soon and talk to you about that and the consequences. But in any event, enjoy. Hopefully, all you get a break over the summer and enjoy your newfound legal status. You can join lots of other things that have been legalised in the last number of years. Fiscal accounts, I think, is as fun as all those other things. But anyway, thank you very much for coming and joining us, Robert Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Right. So
we've got A or B left, basically.
We just have any other business. Okay, members.
Just a couple of
Yeah, we have a couple of bits of we've got any other business now. If anyone has any other business they wish to raise, indicate now. I just have one. Actually, have a couple of bits of any other business. One relates to, we talked earlier on about our invite in September to the Oireachtas. As we were discussing that, it came in via Clarida, and we have been invited to the extremely long, to the joint committee. That's why it's so long. That's why it's the joint committee on finance, public expenditure, public services reform, digitalisation, and the Taoiseach. And I'm pleased to invite the committee to see us on Wednesday the 16th of September in Leinster House. So that's confirmed. They have proposed something which is actually an ESRI research programme, economic and social challenges on an island-wide basis, sharing the island. I think that would be useful if members are content. We don't need to give a view now for that suggested theme. It seems very reasonable to me, but we'll share that and members can give views. We can give views next week, so it'll be next week's pack, so members consider your views on that as a suggested topic. But that's the 16th of September. and that means we'll be here on the 9th of September. The other matter relates to another legislature, another committee. Myself and the Deputy Chair have been invited to participate in an evidence session with the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. I was there last week wearing a different hat, but they have invited us to participate in that membership. I think it would be most helpful, particularly given they are hoping to get evidence from UK government, certainly the Northern Ireland office. I think it would be helpful for us to be there and be able to ask those questions. Obviously, members, if you have a view on that, but I would certainly hope to make my diary available to
Like, what is it they're taking
basically,
evidence on? Is it on
well,
Friday?
the evidence.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Sorry, is this it?
Various things. I think it will probably be the executive finance is ongoing budgetary situation, so it will include everything but the budget need, all those things we discuss. If members are content, we will hopefully, diaries permitting, and in my case, childcare permitting, and various other things. I hope the participative members are content with that. I think it's useful, and I also think it will enable us, if there are officials from either the Northern Ireland Office or the Treasury, to ask them to come and give evidence to us in Belfast, which would be even more useful. Okay. If there's no other business, no, we'll go on to date, time and place of next meeting. It'll be the last meeting of the term, and it'll be here Wednesday 1st of July, 2 p.m. in the Senate chamber. I'm going to put the question, the committee's now adjourned. The committee's now adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
And I might need to talk.
Senate Chamber. Sound.